In celebration of the 2021 International Day of Democracy holding worldwide today, the Good Luck Jonathan Foundation has called on African leaders to safeguard democracies in the continent through the adherence to the rule of law and delivery of good governance. The foundation, being promoted by Nigeria's former president, Good Luck Jonathan, in a statement also called on the Nigerian government to deliver on the promises of good governance, prioritize credible elections, and guarantee the rights of all citizens. It expressed worry over the essential values of democracy, such as the rule of law, separation of powers, and constitutionalism that were no longer adhered to in many African countries. The International Democracy Day came into force after a resolution was passed by the United Nations General Assembly in 2007.
Now, for a little more focus on the message of this year's International Democracy Day, we're now being joined by from our Abuja studio, Dr. Timipere Allinson, Head of Programs at the Center for Democracy and Development. I want to say thank you very much for joining us here on Newsday. Now, to get us all started,
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron.
Okay, to get us all started, we know that democracy is the way forward for governance globally. But talk to us, Nigeria's democracy, how would you rate it at this very point in time?
Yeah, that is a very important question that we all must answer, and it keeps rising almost every time. It's 22 years since we began this phase of our democratic experience, and if you want to compare it against the military era, we can say yes, we have made tremendous progress. I remember my secondary school days under the last dictator to rule before Abdulsalami. That was General Sani Abacha. A lot of what we do today, we couldn't do. A lot of places we go today, we couldn't go. But if we want to compare democracy with democracy, so democracy in Ghana, for example, with democracy in Nigeria, then you begin to see that we are not doing very well at all. We are still living with the ban on Twitter, which I think just hit its 100th day. Maybe today or in a few days it will hit 100th day. These are just recurring incidents in the past 22 years, different forms of creeping authoritarianism, government efforts to stifle expressions of speech, freedom of association, shrink the civic space. And we are continuing to see these grow day by day, particularly when government can no longer bear criticisms. And I think the fundamental foundations of democracy, besides free and fair election and the right of the people to criticize government, is to understand that everyone has the right to determine how they live their life. And often we do not see that. Even in our own private lives, a lot of people want to force their opinions on people. So both from the part of government and part of citizens, we are still struggling with our democracy. So we have a lot to do, I think.
Yes, yes. You mentioned quite a few key points that, you know, it seems like the nation is struggling with on our way to developing a healthy democracy. But I wanted to talk about the good governance bit of it. It's such a lofty word. I'm wondering if you could give like some key action points to make sure that some key action ticking points to make sure that the government is on par to keeping this democracy on course.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Hawa, for that question. A key thing government must do is to understand that democracy is a deliberative process. It is not a rule by fiat kind of system. It is not a monarchy. It is not an autocracy. Democracy, you rule with the consent of the people. That is why you are elected in the first place. So we run a representative democracy where it is not always possible to engage everyone. And this is not Athens of thousands of years ago where city-states could feel my hand and then people sit and deliberate. Today we have representatives. How well do they represent us, for example? I mean, in recent years, we've been, in fact, up till yesterday, We've been seeing more requests to take loans, for example. Is it the opinion of the generality of Nigerians that government should go on taking loans? Have we tried other options? Why should that be our first impulse? So one standard that we must, as a country, begin to pursue is deliberative decision-making, inclusive decision-making, feel the pulse of the population. You are in leadership position, it's not because you have absolute wisdom of governance, but many people are just too busy to be in governance or do not think they can actually hold governing roles but can offer advice. So how do you feel the pulse of the people? How often do you engage through their representatives to get to the people and ask for their opinion? Another standard I think we should set for ourselves is to agree that we must grow our democracy. We should expand freedom. Freedom in this country is becoming stifled day by day. So I think for me, inclusive decision-making and expanding democratic freedoms are major standards that we must imbibe. Once we achieve those, I think good governance will begin to work very easily.
All right, Dr. Allinson, please talk to me, because we know that our democracy is still in its infancy stage. But what are the biggest threats to our democratic style here in Nigeria before we brought it into Africa?
Yeah, so a point we have been making at CDD is that a key challenge we've had, while we have tried to build democracy in Nigeria, we haven't really done the socialization process on a very broad scale, so we can have the acculturation of everyone into the democratic culture. Nigerians desire democracy, no doubt. That is why we always push, citizens push that we should expand our democracy. But we really haven't dropped the vestiges of the military era, where governments still believe that the state has the final power and it is always in competition with citizens. So we should have a far-reaching civic education system where, beginning from as early as elementary schools, children are taught how to function in a democracy. And then even in the way we organize ourselves in our religious places, in our cultural activities, and how we engage one another in off-governance situations. How often do we exercise our authority and say, oh, it must be final? Take the university system, for example. Even in our own sector, the civil society sector, many times you see a lot of authoritarianism that you shouldn't see. So those are the threats on the part of the lack of culture. But on the part of those in governance, it is to understand that you hold power and trust for the people in a democracy, that they voted you and can also vote you out. So you owe allegiance to the country, but also to the people, which is what we do not see. This whole big manism, where there must be deference to the individual in authority. If you do not bow to the political office holder, then you are easily termed anti-government, or if you criticize too much, you are termed as one who is there to pull the government and maybe the country down. I think that has been for us a key challenge, even in the work we do as a civil society organization. Each time we want to send out our criticisms, which are always constructive, we begin to wonder how will they receive it, how would we be perceived, but nonetheless we do it. And I think it's the same for many of you journalists, whose job is even on a daily basis. You have to speak with people like us who speak our mind, and often you may be wondering, should we censor people? But I am happy Arise TV stands out. You allow free speech, and we continue to encourage that this happens. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We try to encourage speaking truth to power. And we've talked about the side of the government, and now let's move to the individual citizens. What is our individual responsibility in terms of combating big manism, standing up for our own personal rights, and exercising the authority that we have as human beings in our own nation?
Oh yes, that is a very important thing that we must emphasize. This is a democracy. Citizens have to understand that so long as you belong to this society, you are the big man. That is why they come to you every election to ask for your vote. I mean, if every voter decides, okay, we are no longer voting in the 2023 election, I mean, I tell you, everyone who is in political office will just phase out, because without elections, there will not be anyone. So we should understand that the government is our servant. We are not the government's servant. We decide what happens in the country through our elected representatives, and they must listen to us. So citizens should begin to enforce this right. There is this campaign, Office of the Citizen of the Federal Republic, which has been running for a long time, pushed by a partner civil society organization. Yes, that is what every citizen should understand, that they hold the highest office in a democracy. Your office supersedes that of the president or anyone who currently would say you cannot speak freely. So citizens must enforce their rights. And how do you do that? You speak up, you participate in protests. If there is anything you do not like, you speak your mind and have answers.
All right, Dr. Allinson. Now, let's try to widen the discussion to how things are playing out in terms of democracy in Africa. Now, of course, the recent events that actually happened in Guinea, where President Condé was ousted from government, where, of course, in neighboring Mali, there were 2 interventions by the army in less than a year, and those, one was as recent as May, and in Niger, a coup was actually thwarted in March. Is this still not... How does your center receive all this information and this news that in the 21st century, we're still having military trying to take power on the continent?
Yeah, it is a major concern. You remember, until the late 1990s, same period as when Nigeria became a democracy, the West African sub-region was #1 for military coups. If you go down to the data for the period, you see that quite a lot of coups happen in the 44 countries that make the sub-Saharan African region. Then many of those happen in the West African sub-region. Nigeria, for example, between 1960 and 1999, it was like an average of a coup every 3.5 years. So why are we still seeing these same things happening? Why is the experience almost the same as before democracy? I think several factors come together, and CDD has been spotlighting these factors. One of them has to do with the way our current democratic leaders have handled the democracy. The recklessness, the way they hold this democracy. They don't understand that it is fragile. Democracy is fragile, not only from anti-democratic forces like the Russians or the Chinese who believe they have an alternative model, but also in the way we handle our democracy. Take Alpha Condé, for example. This is a man who was in the forefront of the democratic struggle. He became president. He subverted the constitution so he could perpetuate himself. What about the case in Mali? How did the leaders at the time handle the democracy? Go to Niger. And even in our country today, how do we hold our democracy? I think we, excuse me, we are tempting forces who believe they can use the power of the gun to change things, and that has been a recurring decimal in struggling democracies. So for us to prevent the military from coming in or to create any excuse for usurpers like we have seen in Guinea to take over, we are expected to hold this democracy that we have very dearly and begin to expand democratic freedom. We don't know what will happen in Guinea. I was hoping the regime there will announce a plan to return to democracy.
I want to say many thanks to you,
but
Dr.
sadly,
Allinson,
that is not happening.
For your time here as we celebrate International Democracy Day.